Hyvää iltaa kaikille ja lämpimästi tervetuloa Muskitalon tämän lukuvuoden ensimmäisen Siva Talks-tilaisuuteen. Minä olen Keval Shah, olen liidenlehtori täällä Sibelius Akatemiassa ja tämän uuden keskustelusarjan juontaja. Ennen kuin jatkan englanniksi, thank goodness, pieni muistutus. Sarjan seuraava jakso on tiistaina 7. lokakuuta kello 6 illalla. Ei aamulla. Silloin saan vierakseni suomalais-zambialaisen soul-laulajan Emilia Siskon. Mutta nyt kiitos paljon, että olette täällä. Toivon, että nautitte illan keskustelusta. Olen varma, että siitä tulee todella mielenkiintoinen. Good evening, everybody, and a particular good evening to those of you who are joining us on the online system. It's not a live broadcast, but hello for when you do eventually watch this. I should say that all of these talks are kept online on the Sibelius Academy's website and YouTube channel, so if you know anybody that should have been here or couldn't make it, please just send them that way. This evening's talk will also be available very shortly. My name is Keval Shah. I'm the lead lecturer here at Sibelius Academy and the host of this new series, which is now in its 3rd edition. Before I introduce my guest this evening, a brief reminder of how this evening will go in case it's your first time here. We will speak for about 45 minutes, listen to some music together, and after that there'll also be a short period in which you can ask any of your own questions. So if there are things that you're thinking about as we're having our conversation, please remember them and please don't be too shy to ask them. There truly is no such thing as a stupid question. I'm waiting for someone to prove me wrong on that, but so far nobody has, so I think it is true. And we'll pass around a microphone so your question is audible for everybody. My guest tonight is one of Finland's most successful and influential musicians, an international conductor who works with the world's great orchestras and opera houses, and who's been at the forefront of developments in contemporary music, working alongside legendary composers like the late Pierre Boulez and the late Kaija Saariaho. She has received awards including the Pro Finlandia Medal, the Nordic Council Music Prize, the Passios Prize. There are others, but perhaps I'll just single out one more, which was in 2024. She was appointed Commander of the Order of the Lion of Finland, which sounds pretty serious. Now, in addition to this glittering stage career, she now comes back to her alma mater, the Sibelius Academy, as the school's new professor of orchestral conducting. Truly historic and highly anticipated appointment. And I'm really delighted that she can be with us today. So please welcome Susanna Malki.
Thank you so much.
Truly, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Let's go right back to the beginning, because you are a conductor now, but as a young musician, you don't pick up conducting as your first musical activity, do you? So what was your early training like?
My earliest training was that I played the piano as soon as I could reach the keys. But then the instrumental studies were first the violin, which didn't really match, and then the cello at the age of 8 or 9, which became my main instrument then.
Did you feel that sense of matching quite quickly with the cello?
Yes, I did. I loved the sound, the tessitura, the vibration of it. I loved the way of holding the instrument. I also played in youth orchestras basically from the beginning, and I loved playing the bass line. I think it was a very good spot to observe and listen to the music. And
Did the piano stay in your life once you picked up other instruments? And if so, can you say a little bit about the influence that keeping the piano had on your string playing?
Yes, the piano did stay. I actually played a lot of piano, but for some reasons my parents put me on violin lessons. But I played the piano, and then eventually I even started the piano lessons, and I played all through until my early university years. And I loved it, actually, and I was seriously wondering whether I should change to piano. But maybe it was a destiny thing, but the orchestra world, I mean, the sort of not being alone with the instrument, but having all the others, pulled me in with the cello. And now I regret that I didn't play piano earlier and more seriously, because I would love to be able to play with singers like you do. That would be very helpful in my work with opera works. But
we can swap for a season.
Yes, we should do.
When you were picking up the violin and then picking up the cello and had the piano alongside all of this, did you have aspirations already as a young musician about taking this into your sort of adult life as a professional, or was it something which you were doing as a passionate hobby, but that there were other plans for your future?
It was a passionate hobby, and I think I liked it because it was relatively easy for me. But it wasn't a must in terms of career, and I also had a lot of self-doubt. But then about the age of 16, 17, it kind of hit me, in the guts, and I realized that I have to do this. I really burn for it. And then kind of from that moment on, it became a trajectory, and then I applied for the studies and so forth. But it wasn't an evidence in the sense that I knew that I could become really famous or something. That it was really like exploration to start with, and then wanting to learn. I loved the handcraft part. When I got really good teachers and they would tell me exactly how to think and, make the line really connect and all these things. I just loved it, and it became like a meditation. So practicing, once I got a hunch of what it is to really practice well, it was very addictive.
So then you went on to do cello studies as an undergraduate student, and I think that leads us quite nicely onto your first musical choice of the evening. Maybe you could just introduce this very briefly before we have a listen.
Yes, this is a beautiful piece for cello and orchestra by Dvorak, and it's called Waldesruhe, Silent Woods.
That's the Waldesruhe by Dvorak, performed by Frank Helmerson on the cello, the Gothenburg Symphony Orchestra, and Neeme Järvi. And this is a recording that somehow is very personally important for you because it connects some rather important people and institutions in your life.
That's right.
Do you want to tell us a bit about your relationship with Frank Helmerson, for example?
Yes, I studied with Frans for 4 years in Stockholm, near Stockholm Edsbergs Musikinstitut, this private school. And yeah, those were my Swedish years. Very, very. There are a lot of things, of course, and especially in retrospect, you know, the whole box opens and you see yourself as, you know, in early 20s and, you know, discovering things. It was a very special time. And in a way, maybe I can see now that it also prepared me for conducting because we were, you know, not for so many people in this very small school. And Frans, his solo career took off right at this time. So actually, he was a lot away. And we had to work, you know, it was really practicing time. And then he came and we got this incredible dose of inspiration. And then we should just, you know, digest and practice. And Frans was very... I mean, as you can hear from the way he plays, it's very, very expressive, but always with a fantastic line, you know, and nothing is really overdone, but it's still very intense. And I remember how he was always asking for this kind of, you know, reaching out with the sound. Really beautiful time.
Do you think those are principles of your music making that you really absorbed then and which you've taken with you?
I hope so. Yes, and I think the sound ideal, I mean, of course, in Finland already during my teens, I had heard a lot of Russian musicians, so there is that influence. And Frans himself had studied with Rostropovich, so there is that influence as well. And then later I met cellists from different musical aesthetics, so to speak. And I understood that these were different schools of playing, but at the time, I mean, you kind of think you take everything as it is. But yes, it was very communicative, and I was actually quite shy at the time, and he worked a lot on getting me to really express myself more strongly, and he was very demanding, and I'm grateful for him for that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about being shy, it draws me back to what you said earlier about being full of self-doubt in a way as a young musician. When you were then taking your cello studies so seriously, and then of course you then went on to join the Gothenburg Symphony Orchestra as a cellist, was that self-doubt still there, or were you happy with the path you were on?
Oh, I was very, very happy, but I think I just have the... You know, I don't know if it's a personal thing or upbringing or the culture or all these things together, but I just put the bar impossibly high always. So even if I succeed, I know that I could have done things so much better. So I was basically unhappy with every performance always. And I remember when I went to Gothenburg to audition, when people came to congratulate me, how well it went. I was actually crying in the dressing room because I thought it was so awful. So it's just pathetic, of course. But you know, maybe nobody. I mean, I could have had some people around who would have told me that, you know, actually it's pretty good. You know, it was really tough. But I think young people are like that also. It's part of the trajectory, and of course the comparison is terrible. Especially when you're instrumentalist and you're learning big pieces, and then you have all these famous recordings lined up, and you think, oh, I'll never play this well, and you know, it's just endless.
Was it that sense of the kind of the comparison, the pressure, let's say the lack of comfort with the imperfection of it all? Is it that which drew you away from the cello and into something else, or what? I'm interested in this moment that you are a cellist and then you become a conductor. Yeah, it's
a very good question.
For someone who is lacking in self-confidence, it's quite an ambitious thing to say, you know what, I'll pack in the cello thing and I'll just go and stand up in front of everybody else and tell them my musical ideals. What was that? Talk to us about what that period of transition was like in your mind and practically.
I think I just deeply fell in love with orchestral music. And one reason, of course, why it's so fun to listen to this recording with Franz is that it was the Gothenburg Symphony, and it was Neemejärvi conducting, and I played with him in the orchestra. And actually, already at the time, I think I really knew that I would not stay there, but the official decision came later. But I think I just the conducting part speaks to me, to my polyphonic mind. Cello is a melodic instrument, but I love harmony, and I love polyphony, and I love architecture, and all of these things. With the piano you can have that, or with a string quartet, but really in the orchestral score, you have all of it. And I guess that just, your question is very, very good. I think, I could have asked myself, but maybe just the fascination of all this repertoire and all these amazing things you can do with orchestra just made me forget, or gave me the courage to just try and see what happens.
I think you put it really nicely, that somehow your love for it it's not that you don't have any fear or you don't have any questions, it's more that the love that you have for this thing supersedes those fears.
Yeah, I think that's the case.
You mentioned the string quartet and your love of polyphony, which leads us very nicely on to the next thing we're going to listen to. Do you mind just introducing it briefly, this Debussy, and perhaps draw our ears towards something in particular? Why this recording, and why are we listening to this movement? Yes,
so Debussy, of course, it's the French part of my being. I think Debussy is really the soul of Frenchness for me. And string quartets playing, unfortunately I didn't play very much of that. I played more string trio, but some of the quartet work, and that's really, I think that's the epitome of chamber music. That's really when four people become one. And this was actually this recording I had as an LP, which I listened all over again all the time. Fantastic playing. And I chose the slow movement of the string quartet because it's just very, very, very profound and intimate and beautifully played.
This is the Andantino from Debussy's string quartet, played by the Alban Berg Quartet. really sublime playing, isn't it? It's the Alban Berg Quartet playing the Andantino from Debussy's String Quartet. Listening to that, I start to make some connections between your earlier choice. There seems to be this thing you have about desiring this real clarity of intention in the sound, that all four players play with one unified sense of the music's shape. And maybe this is something I also associate with your own style as a conductor. There's such clarity of
if that's the case, it makes me really happy.
Yeah, you can put that self-doubt voice. You don't need to cry after this one. You can really. It's interesting how the things you choose end up reflecting your musical values.
Or maybe I was influenced by them.
Exactly, that you're sort of inspired by this way of playing that has such clarity and purpose.
And subtle nuances. I mean, there's so much you can do with sound. I mean, that's what I miss actually now as a conductor, that it's not, it's the musician's territory. I can invite the sound, but they are the ones doing it. And I actually, when I was an instrumentalist actively, I just loved that, how much you can choose with the bow's pressure and the kind of vibrato you use and all of that. And when you hear playing like this, it's just unbelievable.
It's interesting for someone as sort of tactile as you, who so sort of enjoys the physicality of the sound, to become a conductor and to be the one person on stage who isn't making sound through this kind of tactile quality.
But I am.
Go on. Explain how conducting satisfies that tactile sense of yours.
Well, I mean, it is different, of course, but it's also about organizing the forces and making room for the good, the sound to come. It's a little bit like in opera, you have to have both the great conductor and the great singer, because if you don't prepare the musical moment and make room for the voice to, be amazing just at this particular musical moment, then it doesn't have the same impact. And we need each other. And I think if I can, one way or another, kind of, how do you say, make the musicians want to give their best sound, or remind, or it depends on who they are and how well they know the repertoire. But it's really, if I wouldn't have the understanding of these nuances, even if the orchestra had it, the audience might not get the same out of it. I don't know. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it needs to be unified under one umbrella, as it were.
Right,
You can't
exactly.
have 80 people with their 80 ideas of nuance.
Exactly.
We need to sculpt it in a particular direction. Your repertoire as a conductor is extremely broad, and of course, one of the things you've done a lot of, yes, opera for sure, but particularly I'm thinking in opera is contemporary opera, with Ades, for example, with Saariaho.
Yeah.
Is working with contemporary music something which you were already doing as a player, or did that come into your life later?
Already as a player. I found it incredibly liberating, actually, to be working with modern pieces. And
Can you explain a bit why is it so liberating?
Yes, because I think all of the musical training, or so much of the musical training, and it has to be that way, I think, because there are traditions and so forth, but it's a lot about learning how things are done, This is the tradition, this is how you do it, and then people tell you exactly how the tactile part of it, as you say. And then comes this modern piece that firstly already has a different energy because it's music of our time. It's not composed in the countryside in the 19th century, but it was 2 decades ago or even last year. It has a totally different energy. And then this explorer side of me was awakened. It's like, oh wow, and then we can maybe do this. And nobody would tell me, no, you can't. I think, and I'm exaggerating now, of course, but I think that it was something that I loved doing because I felt it was more mine. And maybe I had then in me a stronger conviction in my musical choices.
Yeah, I'm wondering then if you then take that experience and finding that musical, the liberty and the the courage that contemporary music demands of you to stamp your musical imagination onto it, because without it, it will not speak. Did you find that actually has had an influence on when you are conducting canonic repertoire?
For sure, yes. And also having been able to discuss with composers and realizing that unlike we may think when we see Beethoven, Beethoven should be like this. And then you speak with composers and you see that they are very flexible. They are very, very happy for input. And sometimes they don't know themselves, we just listen to Debussy and you see any score, and there are markings which are changed, tempo descriptions, he changed this little word. Everything is constantly evolving. And having been in contact with so many living composers also made me understand that even the composers of the past were human beings rather than statues.
Right. I think we have this culture in the education, perhaps, or in our thinking of this Western classical tradition. We stamp this idea of compositional authority onto these figures, and then we are so delighted to find out that actually they question their own authority and they are looking for input from us. In fact, they need us, and the imagination that you bring in, the nuances that you perceive that somebody else might not perceive. It's that which allows the music to breathe. Yeah. And I'm wondering now, at the point you are in your career as a conductor, do you feel satisfied with the balance that you have repertoire-wise of canonic repertoire, contemporary repertoire, stuff which you are... I think, for example, not only contemporary music, but premieres. You were responsible for bringing Kaija Saariaho's last piece, this trumpet concerto, to life. Do you feel like you have a balance that you are satisfied with?
I'm extremely happy about the work situation. It's really perfect. I get to work with the composers I love, and I can be there to, give birth to new pieces. And I get to do canonic repertoire and I get to do opera. So I feel very blessed and grateful.
And now you get to add some teaching into the mix as well.
That's right.
Which we'll talk about in a bit. But before then, your third choice really intrigued me.
Yes.
Because, when we're planning these kinds of things, it's easy to assume that we will always just choose pieces of music which tie into the very concrete ideas we're discussing. And then Susanne and I had been talking a bit, and then I get this list, and in the middle of this list is a Lied by Robert Schumann. This tiny little song from his 1840 cycle, Dichterliebe. It's a particular recording you've chosen with Fritz Wunderlich, the tenor, and Hubert Giesen. Maybe you could tell us why you chose this.
Well, I wanted the human voice to be heard also in this discussion. As I love opera now, just getting to be more and more in this magical world, and I love the human voice. And actually, I had a secret dream of being a singer, but I'll tell you afterwards.
That's same.
But so I wanted something to be sung, and then it would be impossible to choose an opera excerpt. So I thought, okay, it has to be a Lied. And this was the first thing that came to my mind. It's a recording which I found in my student years in the 90s. And I think it just has a particularly exuberant energy. Fritz Wunderlich is really Wunderlich, It's the way he sings, and also the song cycle, the attitude. I was listening to a lot of Lied, actually, and I don't know if young people do this anymore, but, when you have your first heartbreak, then you listen to Winterreise and things like that. But that would be too sad for now. So we go for this one.
Yeah, here we are. This is Ich grolle nicht from Dichterliebe.
Ich grolle nicht, und wenn das Herz auch bricht, ewig verlornes Lieb, ewig verlornes Lieb. Ich grolle nicht, wie du auch strahlst in Diamantenpracht. Es fällt kein Strahl in deines Herzens Nacht, weiß ich längst. Ich grolle nicht, und wenn das Herz auch bricht, ich sah dich ja im Traume und sah die Nacht in deines Herzens Raume und sah die Schlange in ihrem Herzen frisch. Ich sah, mein Lieb, wie sehr du elend bist. Ich grolle nicht, ich grolle nicht.
Ich grolle nicht from Schumann's Dichterliebe, sung by Fritz Wunderlich and Hubert Gießen at the piano. This is a recording which I also was my first experience of this cycle and this voice. And again, this sense of direction. Of course, in a 1.5 minute song, perhaps it's easier to find this through line. But actually, I've heard enough performances of short songs which do not have this through line. And again, and yet another example of something about the way in which you're listening or being inspired by these pieces that have such clear sense of architecture.
Architecture or a pull, imu, we would say in Finnish, you know, and trajectory and gravitation also. I think that's one of those things which I'm fascinated about in harmony and harmonic thinking, that there are these magnetic forces why some harmony actually just has to go, you know, in a certain way. And with this kind of singing and playing, you really, the audience can feel it.
Yeah, it really just pulls you along, doesn't it? You can't,
Totally.
You can't sit back.
No.
And that thrilling high note at the end is,
Oh.
yeah, there we are. Also, if any of my students are in the room, just the quality of the diction in that recording is outstanding. I mean, there's so much text,
Yes.
and you can hear absolutely everything.
It's gorgeous.
It's amazing. There are so many things that I would like to ask you about, and we don't have a huge amount of time. And so I had to think a bit about what are the things which I think all of us might be interested in discussing. And I'd like to probe into something which might be a little bit uncomfortable and or sort of, yeah, strange perhaps to discuss in this forum. But when I'm reading a lot of the press that surrounds your work, it comes again and again, this idea of you as a pioneer, you as a pioneer as a woman in this field. Of course, you're not the only woman who is conducting major orchestras and opera houses, but is it something that you are aware of? Do you see yourself as a role model because you are a woman working at the highest level as a conductor? And when you were starting out as a conductor, were you aware of needing or having or not having role models?
For sure. I mean, if I was aware, actually, I was made aware all the time. There was not one single interview when people wouldn't bring this up in the beginning. Now, when there are young women conductors who tell me that I have been their role model, it makes me extremely happy. That I've been able to, you know, make their way smoother, possibly. Yeah, things have changed a lot. So I entered the conducting class in Sibelius Academy in '95. So it's a long time ago, and most of the reactions were more like people were feeling sorry for me. They
Were you
thought,
the only woman in the
no,
class?
there were others. Yeah, there were others, but nobody had really made the breakthrough, and even internationally, there were none. Although historically we know Nadia Boulanger and, you know, lots of people, but more like exceptions. But it wasn't really like a career choice. What can I say? I mean, it's a huge topic. I think the world is still. I mean, we can see it in the world. You know, in Finland, the women got the vote in 1906, so we have been at the front line. In France, I think it was 1947 or something, because the French women thought that they don't need it, you know, and they have other ways to influence. It's interesting, and when I go to different countries, there are different societies, and we see now in the politics, I mean, there are backlashes to this kind of development. But now in orchestras, it's half and half. So things are kind of naturally changing. I always said that it happens with the society, you know, and I think a lot of things which have happened elsewhere, like the 1968, you know, revolution, and also what happened in pop music. If you would look like what Madonna was doing in the 80s, then me conducting it wasn't that dangerous, you know. Let's face it, you know. So it you know, it was a kind of artificially seen provocation, which it wasn't at all, you know. So, but it has triggered some thinking in people. But I'm super happy that it has changed, and it wasn't always sunshine, but you know, I'm in it for the music, so I was willing to give it a try.
Right, and I'm sure that there were also many other reasons why moments in your training or in your career weren't sunshine. It wasn't. There are challenges beyond this.
Always, yeah. And conducting is a very complicated profession in so many different ways. So it was just one problem more. But it's interesting. But as you say, I mean, for everybody, and choosing to be a performing artist, I mean, you have so many things. Psychologically also you have to go through, and you have to know yourself very well, and in particular when you're in front of people, then it's a whole other planet. But also in the public space, you know, women politicians, how they have been seen, how they are seen, how differently they are seen than the men, and you know, it's not totally solved.
No, they were held to different standards, of course.
Always.
Aren't
Yeah. But, you know, I think I'm in my job for the ears, and I hope that that's the main interest. I you know, conducting is very visual, and of course we can't ignore that part. But I think, you know, the ears will get the real thing.
Speaking of ears, the next thing we're going to listen to is by Schoenberg, but conducted, this is where the ears come in, by the man with the ears. This is Pierre Boulez, who of course was a very important man in your life. Before we listen to this excerpt from the Kammersymphonie, this is the first Kammersymphonie, Opus 9, could you tell a little bit about what influence Pierre Boulez had on not only the shape of your career, but also on your musical philosophy?
I mean, Boulez was a monument, of course. I mean, a living legend, and I actually can't quite believe that I knew him. He was on that level of global genius. So it was a very fortunate thing for a young conductor from Finland to suddenly meet him, and I was, of course, very nervous when I knew that I was going to meet him. And
how did your paths cross?
Well, I mean, the Enter Contemporary, they were looking for a music director, and then I had this concert in Lucerne 2004, which was, I guess, kind of an audition, or they were, you know, first meeting with the ensemble, and I knew that he would come to the concert, so it felt like an audition. And then he came backstage after it, and he was so warm and nice and laughing, and we were not laughing about one particularly tricky thing in Harrison Birtwistle's Secret Theatre, which goes very fast, and we immediately had a great connection, and he was the warmest man with such a, you know, quick brain and sense of humor. And I knew Boulez, you know, in his mellow late years, you know, but of course he was known to be very, very scary in many ways. But yes, to your question of his influence, I mean, he's influenced several generations. But I think now when I analyze it, I've spoken about this with many people who knew him, and we all seem to agree that we miss his presence as some kind of moral and an ethical compass, you know, that, you know, we spoke about putting the bar very high and not, you know, always intellectually going for only the best
Yeah,
and
rigorous.
rigorous, but not only for the sake of it, but for the good of everybody. And you know, respecting the composers. We spoke about, you know, you have to have your input in the music, but of course you have to respect the text, so to speak, first. And then Boulez also, as I've been then in charge of, you know, if you're a music director, you're also in charge of an institution. And Boulez was a great believer in the importance of institutions and what they represent and the responsibility they have in their position in the society. And all of this thinking, I was observing him in board meetings and when he was speaking about things, and he would, you know, until the very end, he was really, you know, very, very, very fiery about his opinions. He was incredibly courageous, not afraid of conflicts, and many people, you know, didn't like that because he was very polemic, but he was also French, so that goes it goes with the culture. But having the courage to say what you believe is very important. I think that's a great role model, and I think we have to remember this in our work as artists in society and in, you know, an educational institution, that we have to pass on this torch. You know, I get on my idealistic channel, you know, when I think of Boulez, because yes, we have to work hard and we have to believe in the right things and values and
yeah,
all
there's a
of
sense
that.
of responsibility there.
Yes.
And I think that of course leads us very nicely to where you are now in this position, coming into an institution and becoming sort of, yeah, at the seat of an institution where you will be responsible for making decisions and shaping how that torch is passed on. Before we talk about that, let's have a listen to him conducting. This is not the whole thing because we don't have time, sadly, but this is just the opening, the first portion of Schoenberg's first Kammersymphonie. Oh, it's a shame to stop that, isn't it?
High energy.
Yeah, this is the opening section of Schoenberg's first Kammersymphonie, conducted by Pierre Boulez, and the ensemble there is the Ensemble Intercontemporain, and that's this 1982 recording, which you love so much. So there we were talking about the influence of Boulez on instilling a sense of the importance of the work, the rigor, the duty, the responsibility, the respect, these values that you clearly carry. Go on.
But also the beauty of all that.
Yeah, exactly, the good of it. Yeah, what comes out of that is not something which is authoritarian or quite the opposite. It's actually something which is very generous.
It's generous and it breathes and it's clear and it's beautiful. Yeah, I think Boulez was, of course, as I already said, and everybody said, he was unbelievably intelligent and cultivated and everything. But he was also somebody who, he was a Frenchman. He had a sense for aesthetics and he was never sentimental, but it doesn't mean that he wouldn't have feelings. It's just that everything was very classy,
Yeah. And so all of these values that we're now talking about are stuff which you think is very important to pass on. You're about to start, well, you have started, not about to. I must remind myself, we're already a few weeks into the semester.
Yeah.
You've started this new position where you are responsible for a really important department that has, for generations now, shaped musical life not only in Finland, but across the world. Do you have a sense of what it is that you would like to share during your tenure? Is there something is there a vision which you are trying to bring to life?
Yeah, it's a monumental task, of course. But already, if I manage to pass on so many great things from my own teachers, and passing on the tradition, so to speak, there's so much to share. I'm sure you agree. We've all been trained by so many generations of teachers, and it's up to us to pass that on. So I'm not inventing new things. I'm basically sharing the information and experience that I have. But yes, of course, I can also invite people to think the bigger picture. And actually, just this afternoon, I had a meeting with the students, and tomorrow we're going to do musical work. But we were talking about the things they are willing to do, and I was asking them about their vision and dreams and everything, and many of them mentioned this fact of orchestras being, what is the role of the orchestra in society? These are young people are intelligent. They are aware of things, and they know that the world is consisting of so many possibilities, and it's up to us to choose what kind of evolution and direction we can let it have, or what we can help survive. And so there is the musical part, and then there's the so-called institutional part, which doesn't mean to be boring, on the contrary.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's this, what you say about the role, your students talking about the role of orchestra in society, there's this very clear sense, I feel, in a really positive way, in young people's attitudes towards education, that there needs to be a bigger picture.
Oh, yeah.
That the relationship between the art and the world in which the art is made isn't something which you can conveniently leave to one side. And I think that's an exciting invitation to someone like you, who is both now educator and performer, to, I guess, interrogate what that relationship means to you, but also how you encourage them to find their own answer to that question. Are you hopeful about the future of orchestras and the societies in which they exist?
I am, but I'm also thinking that we can't do it sort of halfway. I think the only thing which will survive is the real thing, the full commitment and the highest quality. And I'm also a big believer in human connection, and we live in a digital age. And thanks for all the digital audience. It enables us to connect in so many ways, and I can hear recordings, and there are good things about it. But I think the analog parts and having people in the same room, that hasn't gone away. And I think in the future, maybe more than 100 years ago, people will need to spend time with others because we are otherwise in our own bubbles. So I'm a big believer in the power of music. Like I feel the listening when we are listening to a recording, and then if we add living people, making the sound which vibrates in the room and all of this on cellular level, I believe that we have a fantastic message, all this repertoire, and also we are living and breathing people, and music is such a fantastic way of living through and processing emotions. That's why you listen to Lied when you have a heartbreak, It's just the best therapy ever.
Yeah.
And it's unbelievable, the power of it. I have no doubt. But we need to find the audiences, and of course the challenges are, how do we make ourselves interesting when the marketing machines are, there's a lot of entertaining, dominating, and all of that. How can do people actually believe that they want to come to a dark room to listen to somebody sing when they can go, to see a movie with special effects and all of that? But I believe we have a lot to give.
Yeah.
But we have to believe in
yes,
it
exactly.
also.
And we have to be able to articulate that value. If we can't articulate the value, then we can't expect people to just assume that it's valuable,
No.
right?
Right.
Well, it sounds like you have your work cut out for you. Speaking of the highest quality music making and lovely music with good people, let's have a listen to your final track, which I think needs little introduction probably to most people in this room. So I'll tell you what it is afterwards, maybe. But it's conducted by Leif Segerstam, and the players are the players of your former orchestra, the Helsinki Philharmonic Orchestra. we should all go home and finish listening to that. This is Tapiola by Sibelius, performed by the Helsinki Philharmonic Orchestra and Leif Segerstam. We have got a little bit of time for some questions from you in the audience, and I think we have a microphone that can be passed around. So if you do have something you'd like to ask Susanna, please feel free. Oh, look, great. I really don't mind. Maybe we could just sort of, go in this direction and make sure that everyone that put their hand up manages to get it.
Can I ask you while we wait?
Of course. Yes, sure.
After 4 winters in Finland,
Yeah.
do you listen to Sibelius differently?
Yes, but at the same time, I'm mindful. I grew up in the UK, and I had this very strong understanding of the perceived relationship between Vaughan Williams's music and the landscape. And I was mindful of not falling into a listening trap with myself of associating things with the music which might limit my understanding of it. So with Sibelius, yes, I will confess, I remember going to Oulu last winter, rushing ahead on the train. Actually, not really rushing, it was quite a slow train, but fast enough on the train, and I was listening to Sibelius 3. And that second movement, there's all those pairs of winds. I thought, I understand this music in a different way. There's a kind of, there's an earthiness or a kind of, I'm sort of scratching my finger for some reason, as if to say a kind of roughness in the sound, which I totally can understand now that I've seen what a rough winter looks like. And people tell me that winters in Helsinki are not as rough now as they used to be because of climate change, but they're rough enough for me.
Rough enough for you.
But I went for the first time to Ainola this summer. I played on his piano, but I went to that little place where he used to sit among the trees.
Right.
And there, I think I really got a sense of the expanse of the music, the sense of space and air in the sound, which certainly in my favorite recordings of his music, I think is a pretty essential quality, the sense that no matter how dense the textures are, there are pockets of air that are always allowing the music to breathe. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm very grateful to Finland's winters. And that's not on the record. I think I won't say that in future, but they've definitely taught me some things. And I've also learned how to not fall over in the winter. So it's all good. A question.
Hello. So you spoke of the kind of dichotomy between tradition and sort of your own inputs and freedom when interpreting music. And so I was wondering, how do you approach finding that sort of sweet spot between the freedom and the tradition when playing standard repertoire, working with composers who you can't directly communicate with?
Very good question. I think that's something that you never stop asking, because we don't want to do justice to the composer. But I think if you have strong instincts, it is a sign that we need to stop and find out why. So analytically, we understand if you get very strong emotion about something, then it's good to analyze it. How is it done? Just for us to be professionally, aware of all the facets. But then also, I think music needs to come alive, and if you make a decision out of your most sincere feeling that this will make this moment special, I think you have a right to do it. But you have to stay in the context, to be aware of the proportions of it, so that it doesn't, sometimes less is more. Then, of course, it depends on the musical style and so to speak. But if we stay too neutral, it is also, I wish I had a solution. But I think the main thing is that if you have an instinctive wish to do something, it's a good thing, and then you can still debate for days or weeks. You can try out, but that means that you have a personal connection to the piece, and maybe in the end, the special feeling about it will be transmitted to the listeners, even if you don't do anything radical about it. That already your own presence will transmit your focus on this particular interval or whatever it is. I think it's precious if you have a strong feeling about something.
Thank you.
Just someone just behind there in the glasses, yeah.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for your views. I was wondering if you could share how you approach intellectually a piece. How do you construct in your mind this sort of unit of conception from beginning to end? And if you do so, how do you teach your students about that?
Well, it's a very long process to learn a piece, and especially, you know, if we think of a lot of the orchestra repertoire, of course, a piece is very long. So a duration like a Mahler symphony, one movement can be half an hour, and not even to speak of operas. I think it's work, and you build up layers. So you read the score several times, but always with slightly different eyes. So you read, I tend to read first the proportions to get the big architecture, and then for each reading, I go into more details. And then you also need to read all the lines of different musicians, and then you read it horizontally, and you read it vertically. And yeah, it takes a lot of time. And how you build your own of it, I think that comes naturally with it. And it also comes to the previous question about the interpretation. And I sometimes compare this work to a text, that if you have 3 different actors reading the same text, they will read exactly the same words, but the impression you get will be different because it's a different person reading it. So I think many of the decisions I'm not even aware of. And it happens to me sometimes that I'm performing something and then somebody comes and said, "Oh, it was very interesting that you chose this tempo because ABC, you know, whatever." And then I'm like, "Oh, wow, is it different than it usually is?" Because I didn't do it on purpose. I just felt very comfortable with this tempo, for example. So it comes naturally. But yes, the process is very, very long. And it happens also in interaction with the musicians. So sometimes with acoustical conditions or like last summer I was in Munich, and they have this amazing way of playing with this, you know, very, very physical sound. And it influenced my interpretation, but I loved it. So I of course I welcomed it as a part of. And sometimes in acoustics you just adapt the tempo a little bit. So many things play a role.
Maybe we should have one more, yes. There.
One more, okay. Perhaps an easier one. You mentioned your Swedish years, but you also had your Norwegian years.
That's right.
And I know something about them because I was also in Norway in that time, not as a musician, but as a civil servant. But in terms of your further development and all the things that you learned in Stavanger, now in retrospect, what would you say that, how were those years and what did you learn in Norway?
Oh yes, very beautiful years. I was very grateful for these opportunities. There were many pieces of the repertoire that I conducted for the first time with the Stavanger Symphony Orchestra. And I remember, like very often in Nordic countries, you have people, the audiences are very close to nature, so there's a different kind of listening. And and I think you can feel it in the sincerity of the music making in a different way. I don't know. I don't say that big people are not sincere, but it's just more. It's somehow closer to the to the earth, and I have some really clear recollections of musical experience of doing a particular piece for the very first time, and getting this very, very valuable experience of the unity of the group and the orchestra together. And I remember also I played some chamber music with some of the players, and I think in the retrospect I wish I had had more experience, because of course you develop, and sometimes, young conducttors need to make their mistakes in front of people. That's kind of part of the trajectory. Because you learn from experience. But those were great years, and we did some tours also, which were wonderful.
Is that go on? Last one.
Thanks a lot. You thought about the young Susanna being doubting your playing and maybe being vulnerable. And on the other hand, you told that people said that they were sorry for you when you started your studies as a conductor in that kind of atmosphere that was present in 1995. What would you say, because I think it's about the people who are playing in an orchestra. As a conductor, how do you make people to give their best, and how you make the orchestra fly, and how you make people to kind of be together to make the music as its best, which I think also needs kind of positive working atmosphere and stuff like that.
Yes, of course. I mean, you're working with people, so you have to be sensitive to the energy of people. And what is particularly interesting in conducting is, of course, that you have a group of highly skilled individuals, but they're also a group. So the psychology of the interaction is sometimes 1-to-1, and sometimes it's 1-to-100. And the dynamic changes. And I think in a way, if musically the wavelength, if there is a shared love for the music, that's really great starting point. People have very different. They can come from different directions. For example, I was trained in Finland, but if you go and work with a German orchestra, they have a very different kind of orchestra culture even, or in England, and the whole society is different. So you have to know something about communication, obviously. I always try to not think about myself, but about the task at hand. I think it's the music that unites us. It's the music that unites those people in the orchestra. And of course, inspiration is also definitely vital for a performance which will make an impact. But then also there is the work part, and I think that it's interesting. Actually, it's tied to the question of excellence in a way. How willing we are to brush really the details, and we spoke a little bit beforehand about the diction of how much you can express just by pronouncing a certain word in a certain way, and some people love this kind of work, and then there are people who think that doesn't really matter. More important is that we have a lot of fun, you know. And there are many different approaches, and sometimes you have to be sensitive to with orchestras whether they are interested in your ideas or not. And you know, it's just normal. But basically, you have to. I believe that I have to put the bar. I'm not the bar. How should I say? I think there's a certain work ethic, and then there is the inspiration, and in the end also I always say, and I didn't invent this, that we only know each other after we've done a concert together. Or even if I work with singers for an opera production and we spend almost 2 months together or 6 weeks. But until the day of the performance or after performance, we actually didn't know each other, because the performance is the sort of sacred moment when we are totally vulnerable and we have to trust each other fully. And if this happens, then it's magical. But we can't plan it. We can't plan it happening, but we can prepare the conditions for it. So if the the flame of inspiration is to descend, then everything is catered for it. I don't know if I answered to your question a little bit.
Well, listen, I think we could go on all evening, but I think we should just stop there. And let me first just thank you all for joining us this evening for what I certainly have found to be a very, very inspiring set of answers from Susanna Malki.
Thank you.
A reminder that we meet next on the 7th of October when Emilia Sisko, the Finnish Zambian soul singer, will be in conversation with me. And a final thanks, of course, to my guest, Susanna Malki. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.